Hello. Hi. Is this working? Is it working? We'll wait a second for people to hopefully make this happen. The chatting has stopped. That's a good sign. It's a bad sign. Hello. Oh. People are saying hello. Yes, good. Great. I apologize if the video feed is extra grainy or pixelated. My output, which I use at least once a month, every month for recording the podcast, the letters page, is acting weird, and so I've done a weird downsampling thing to make it work. But here we are. Here we are. Yeah, we'll be putting the questions in the chat here, and the best way to do it is uh, what you do is you type @games for typing your question, and then it will pop up on my screen in a way that makes it easier to uh, respond and make sure I'm not missing your questions. So, hello, hello, hello. Look at everybody. Goodness gracious. Remote Blackgate says, "You're fine. You look good." And you know what? Thank you. You look good too today. You look great. Okay. So, let's see. Let's put that there. I've got so many windows open. What am I doing? Having so many windows open. My fear is that halfway through this recording, the video settings will fix themselves, and then everything will be messed up. But that's all right. That's okay. We'll do a better job with video things in the future when we are not all spread out across so many different locations. All right. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to this live stream. It's an AMA, which I am told stands for Ask Me Anything. And so let's get right to it. I've already got one question in the chat. I imagine I am going to get more soon. We're here to talk about Sentinels: The Multiverse Definitive Edition. And that is a new version of Sentinels: The Multiverse is coming out later this year. So, questions. First question today comes from Robert Lounsbury III, who asks, will the decks have different cards or just different text? And the answer is both. There's going to be many cards that you recognize the names and effects of. There's going to be some cards in which you're like, oh, this effect seems similar to a card as before, but the name is different for some sort of thematic reason that makes sense. And there's some cards that you've never heard or seen of before that do brand new things. One thing that I will say that I'll try to not keep circling back to is just yesterday we put out an episode of the Letters Page podcast, which is the podcast that Adam and I do that talks about Sentinel comics. Oh, the questions are coming in fast now. I'll catch up. Anyway, yeah, so the Letters Page podcast episode, I believe 165, just came out yesterday, and it talks in depth about all these things. So I will be surprised if I get any questions in here that weren't covered in the Letters Page, but I might. Who knows? I am your captive audience for at least an hour. And also, if you are a subscriber to the Greater Than Games podcast, that same episode is up there. So if you don't want to have to listen to the Letters Page, you can listen to it on the Greater Than Games podcast feed. Okay, next question from Dylan Croft. Are you introducing better boss scaling for 2 and maybe 1-player games? So, Sentinels: The Multiverse Definitive Edition is still a 3 to 5 hero game. I will say it scales better in the 3 to 5 hero range than it did before, but it's still not for 2 heroes and not for 1 hero. We definitely played around with making it a 1 hero, 2 hero game, but the point of the game is the interactions between multiple heroes, is being a game in which a group of heroes work together against an opponent that they couldn't defeat on their own. And so the interplay between heroes is necessary for the game to function. All right. Victor Evangel asks, how will Definitive Edition affect the digital edition? That is a great question that I am not the person to answer. We are in talks with Handelabra, and we're working out exactly how this version of Sentinels will look when it comes to digital. It will come to digital, but how? Time will tell. So I will leave that up to Handelabra rather than making promises here. Or I could just promise some things. Oh, well, in digital version, it'll have free lemon drops. The digital version of Sentinels Definitive Edition, free lemon drops. You hear it here, folks. I'm going to get in trouble with Handelabra. All right, let's see. Questions. Eric Conrad writes, has Absolute Zero been redesigned? Redesigned? No. No. There's only one character. No, there's only one hero who has been, I would say, like, entirely redesigned, but even then, that's not entirely. Um, Absolute Zero has had some quality of life updates and has had some tracking lots of different things happening, overhead reduction. But Absolute Zero is the character that he's always been. He's just the better version of that character. Robert Lounsley asks, will you make a campaign set of rules? It's part of the game. There's a thing in the game called events. And events, there are two types of events, regular events and critical events. And playing through the events in the chronological order with the dates all right on the top of the event cards gives you a campaign that with each set we put out will add significantly to that campaign. So, yes is the answer to your question. Jared Bravewater writes, while we are waiting for the other 5 definitive editions, we'll be able to play with the original edition decks. So not as is out of the box, but we're going to be releasing as part of the Kickstarter a document that is like, okay, if you want to play with content that isn't definitive edition content, be it previous editions or fan-made editions or other things, you can use this rubric of, okay, treat this like this, and when these things happen, do this thing, this sort of thing. It won't be perfect, it won't be one-to-one, but it is a way of using older content with the newer game mechanics and the newer system. So that's something that will happen. All right. Oh no, the questions jumped. I see Maggie in the chat said, no, don't. Jeremy's going to be mad at us. Well, it's too bad. It's too late. It's too late. Oh gosh, I'm so far behind in questions. All right. Where are we? Patrick Curtin said, you said that the RRP will be 60 and 50. Yes, the MSRP will be $60. So yes, the MSRP of the game will be $60, $50 to Kickstarter. Do you have any estimate for delivery prices? No, I do not have any estimate for delivery prices. Shipping has changed phenomenally in the last year. 2020 threw a bunch of wrenches into the entire shipping system of how it worked. And we are going to, between now and when the Kickstarter launches, figure out exactly how we're handling shipping. But shipping is in great flux right now. So any answer that I'd give you right now would be invalidated by the time the Kickstarter came around. So we will have a comprehensive shipping section on the Kickstarter, and that will have to be where that answer is because things are just too up in the air right now. All right. Brian asks, will the villains of the Multiverse expansion only have Vengeance-style villains, or will it have heroes and environment decks in it? So, Brian, there isn't an expansion called Villains of the Multiverse for this set. There isn't an expansion that does contain a villain team versus hero team sort of content, and that will have heroes and environments and variants and events in it as well. So... Damn Filthy Casuals writes, not a question, but I've already been promoting the heck of this on Facebook. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. We're very excited about it, and we hope that you folks are as well. Russ Luzetsky writes, love that there are many and varied styles built into the current decks. Are you planning to retain that? For example, will Mr. Fixer and Definitive Edition still be the relaxed Zen style of play? Yeah, that is it's certainly the intent that each character has their own kind of approach to how the game works, to what you're sort of doing at the table. And we think that if anything in Definitive Edition, we drilled more into that of making the characters more themselves. Some characters, like Tachyon has always worked the way that she should work. We tightened up a few mechanics with her and like zoomed in on some parts of her that were better, cut off some corners. But like Tachyon works the way that she should work. Bunker had some problems, and Bunker didn't quite work the way he should work. He still is recognizably the same character, but works even more like himself than he did before. And you can expect that same sort of thing, that the characters were dialing in on who they are and making them the best versions of themselves. Or the worst versions of themselves in the case of villains. All right, next question. Jesse Garrison writes, are the critical events flipped when you win to give you access to the villain variant, or is the villain variant the rules tweak that appears on the front of the regular events? So on the front of regular events, you have a rules tweak, and that's what you play. And on the back of the regular events, that's the collections, which is the bonuses you get. On critical events, the front side of it has some story information, comic book cover, your collection limit, and then you flip it over, and it's the character card that you play as. So you don't flip it when it's flipped the entire game. The front side is just information on what it is you're about to play, and the back is, okay, play this thing. Question. Licky Zero writes, I heard there are more heroes in the base set. Are they all old, or are some new? So there's 12 heroes in the base set, and it is the Freedom 5 plus their intern/sidekick Unity, and then the Prime Wardens plus their oft associate Ra. So those are the 12 heroes in the core game. Joshua L. Kelly asks, you talked about environment destruction mostly going away, but there are still cards like domes in Wagner Mars Base and rooms in Freedom Tower. How will these cards function? So those cards will all be either destroyable by something that specifically destroys them, or they'll be ongoing cards, and so ongoing cards can destroy them. And there is still some small amount of environment destruction in the game. Devastating Aurora from Citizen Dawn blows up environment cards. Tempest has a card that can destroy environment cards, but there's very little of it, mostly because environment cards now have the standard one-shot, ongoing, or a target sort of keywords that you're used to seeing from other things. That is the way that they are most commonly going to be destroyed, although many of them are able to be dealt with in other ways. All right, Charlie Blotcher writes, is there a tentative schedule for future expansion releases? Wondering when the new version of Omnitron X will be available. The goal is to put out one core set, one expansion, one box every Gen Con until we finish the line. So that's a schedule that we are attempting to stick to. I don't want to promise anything at this point. I will promise that we're attempting to stick to that schedule. We'll see how it goes. So Oswald Green writes, when will it be up on Kickstarter? March 30th, it goes live on Kickstarter. I see a lot of chatter that isn't necessarily, that may or may not be questions, and I'm going to tell you right now, I am skipping anything that doesn't have an @ greater than games, because that highlights it on my screen. So there's so many questions coming in so quickly that I've got to go with the highlighted one. So if you've asked a question, you're like, why didn't he answer it? Submit it, make sure you put the @ greater than games thing in the YouTube chat. Great. Awesome. Next question. Video Game Boy Michael asks, are there plans to bring Definitive Edition to digital? Yes, I talked about that earlier. Brady Kennedy writes, are there any decks in the Definitive Edition that are not being updated in terms of a new card or updated effects? A few heroes stand out to me as being extremely well balanced. Brady Kennedy, we agree. There are some heroes that are very well balanced, and even still, we're going to update the art, we're going to update the game text to fit with the right version of Definitive Edition, and we're going to make sure they fit really well with the mechanics of Definitive Edition, because the mechanics are different. Not hugely, but notably. And so everything is getting updated one way or another. Some decks are incredibly similar to what they were before. Some are not. So, all right, where are we here? I'm still getting caught up to when Maggie was offended by me talking about digital. Colin Amos asks, what was the first deck you looked at and thought, okay, this really needs some reworking? So we started the first deck that we started with. We're like, okay, let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about Legacy's deck and go through Legacy's deck, which Legacy's deck works great. We're all happy about how Legacy's deck worked. Nothing to change here. Let's just change the art. And when we're talking through the art, we're like, well, hold on though. This isn't really quite right. This isn't really representing the character of who Legacy is, what he's doing. Like, he has these powers, and we've talked about those powers before, but we don't have a card for the fact that he has keen vision. It's one of his key powers, is his vision. Why isn't that one of his cards? Okay, well, if we're changing all the art anyway, and we're updating, this and that and the other, and we're talking about cleaning up mechanics, we're printing all new things, and that was the thing that changed us from this is a cosmetic upgrade to the game to this is a complete new version of the game that we did not realize what we were embarking on until we began that embarkation and went, oh, this could be something greater than it was. And so that's where we ended up. Damn Filthy Casuals ask, what were the 6 environments? In the podcast, I believe you only mentioned the original 4 from the core game. That's true. There's the 4 from the core game, as well as Magmaria and Freedom Tower. The doc asks, are the expansion releases for the Definitive Edition going to mirror the original? No. So just like the core game has very different content than the original version of Sentinels the Multiverse, each of the expansions are different, and the expansions are bigger, and they're all based around teams of heroes. So spoilers, not spoilers, the first expansion is based around the team Dark Watch. So it fits kind of with the first one being the Rook City expansion, and yet it's still different. Okay, let's see. Questions. Powerhound asks, will the box say 1 to 5, 2 to 5, or 3 to 5? If 1 or 2, will it be made clear that you need to play minimum 3 heroes? Yes, the box says 1 to 5 because the game is, in fact, playable 1 to 5 players. I know lots of people that play it 1 player. I know lots of people that play it 2 players. And the rulebook explains that it's a 3 to 5 hero game, but you can play it with 1 or 2 people. You just need to have a minimum of 3 heroes and a maximum of 5 heroes. All right. JHKOAZFM, I'm not even going to try, asks, can you tell us anything about what may or may not have happened to Savage Mana? Savage Mana is there's not a card named Savage Mana in Haka's deck now, but there is still a card that talks about the mana that he deals with as a Maori warrior. Yeah. So it's gone, but is it? Is it just better? It is. Okay. Mandor. Oh, shoot. The chat jumped again. You guys are saying so many things. I gotta scroll. Oh my gosh, so much scrolling. Oh my goodness. At a certain point, I'm gonna have to tell you to stop asking questions so I can catch up. At this point, there is more space below the bar than there is above the bar, the thumb. So, like, give me a second here. All right, Mandor Random writes, with Definitive Edition, will we get new heroes and villains and or get full decks for the villains that only have team decks? Or will Definitive Edition just be an overhaul of the existing decks? Definitive Edition will be an overhaul of the existing decks. Will there be new content beyond that? That is up for time to tell. But in the core game, no. The core game has 12 heroes, 6 villains, 6 environments that are extant from the world of Sentinel Comics. Other things, that's one step at a time. I tried that time. Can you give us examples of where fixed damage happens versus irreducible damage? Yes, irreducible damage is damage that cannot be reduced. It can still be increased, but not reduced. Fixed damage can be neither increased, nor reduced, nor redirected. Amazing. All right. Okay, what else here? Joshua Kelly asks, future expansions, how will they be divided? If they're all going to be the same size, deck sizes that make that seem tricky, especially with all team villains in one expansions. So they're all going to be roughly the same size, but some of them might have, a dozen more or fewer cards, depending on like if there's an extra set of cards for the Bloodsworn Coliseum in it or something like that. But they're all going to be roughly the same-ish amount of content. Okay. Vrick writes, Sentinels of Earth Prime was supposed to be compatible with Sentinels of Multiverse. It is. Do you know if Green Ronin is updating their decks for Definitive Edition, or will they only work with the current Sentinels of Multiverse? That is up to them. I have extended them the offer of, like, do you want me to update it, or do you want to keep it because here's the thing, is, like, Sentinels of Earth Prime is compatible, as currently written, with Sentinels of Multiverse, with all of the Sentinels of Multiverse content that's already come up. If they want me to update it to Definitive Edition, then it will only be compatible with Definitive Edition content and not all of the Sentinels of Multiverse content. So, that is up for them to decide, and we'll find out what happens. All right. Michael Allers writes, when this ships, my collection of Sentinels of Multiverse, Earth Prime, Print and Play, and other customs will be 400 decks. Whoa, wow, that's a lot. But I'm all in because Sentinels. What should I say to convince others with customs to buy Definitive Edition? So, depending on how long you've been playing Sentinels of the Multiverse, you have gotten an amount of enjoyment out of it. If you want to play the Definitive Edition, but you're like, oh, but I have all these customs, you can update those customs if that's your thing that you're made, or you can use the rubric that we're going to put out to be like, okay, this works in these ways. But also, like, this is Sentinels of the Multiverse is a product that came out in 2011. We wrote it in 2010. It's been out for over a decade at this point. It's this huge game that's been around for a long time, and it doesn't stand up, the 2011 version, the enhanced edition, even art, and like, I'm a better writer and a better game designer than I was 10 years ago, and Adam's a much better artist than he was 10 years ago. Sentinels of the Multiverse really still continues to be a popular game that sells well, and so we want to have a new version that speaks to how to the quality that the game could be, and so that's the point of Definitive Edition. Does that mean that some stuff's gonna feel like it gets left behind? Yeah, maybe. But we feel like it's worth it, and people are welcome to update their custom stuff, their home stuff, their other stuff to bring it in. But I guess the question of, like, how do I convince other people that it's worth it to buy Definitive Edition? Don't even try. Play it with them. Play Definitive Edition with them and see how that feels. Because I'll tell you what, after having worked so much and so hard on Definitive Edition and played so much Definitive Edition, even though there's only 12 heroes, 6 villains, 6 environments, I find playing it to be definitively better than playing the original version of Sentinels. And I love original Sentinels. I mean, it's my baby, I love it. I love playing Sentinels, but Definitive Edition feels better across the board. So that's, I guess, the answer. All right, questions. PK Sullivan. Hi, PK. Will there be new characters in Definitive Edition cycle? Perhaps characters have been created through the podcast. Perhaps. not going to talk about that yet. I need to start reading the questions before I read them out loud, because at this point I'm covering things I've already said before. David Walker, Young Lady still a promo, or will she become her own deck? Time will tell. 139th Dawn, who was the character that drastically changed? You mentioned. Oh, I would say that Bunker is the one that's changed the most. Or maybe do I mean Omnitron? Omnitron's also changed a lot. Let's see. I'm going to start skipping questions that I've already answered in other ways. Chrissy Barrel. Will the old edition be discontinued as you start to roll out more expansions for Definitive? So we at this point we have no intention to reprint any of the original edition content. Some of it we still have in stock, some of it's sold out in stock, and we just won't be printing it anymore. It's still good. It's still out there available for sale places, and if you want to get it, great, go get it. It's a good game. It plays well, but we won't be printing any more of it. Alex Paul, will you? Okay, I already answered this question. Joshua Kelly. Joshua Kelly asks, have any of the heroes had their base powers changed? Can you spoil one if so? I'm particularly curious about Tachyon. The answer is yes. Some heroes have had their base powers changed, and I'm happy to tell you one of them, but I want to read it from the hero deck, so I'm giving, or the hero character card, so I'm giving you the exact right wording. You mentioned Tachyon, so I'll go down to Tachyon and read Tachyon's. Tachyon's base power is now reveal the top card of your deck, draw it, or discard it. Let me give you another one. Let's see. Well, I'm sure somebody will ask for one. Many of these are the same as they were before, but many of them are different. I'll give you Bunkers just because we've already talked about Bunker a little bit. Either draw one card or put the top card of your deck under one ordnance card in play. What does that mean? Who can say? Who can say? Back to questions. Harrison Potter, have you announced when the Kickstarter goes live? Yep, March 30th. It's also in the original announcement. Quasi Quirky asked, would you be willing to tell us the name of the 5 expansions? And if it is now, what are they? So no, I'm not willing to tell you the name of the 5 expansions. It's too soon on that. Too soon. Code Turtle, cards, overall card count of each deck the same? Yes, so the question is, we know that many decks will contain entirely new cards. Is the overall card count of each deck the same? And if not, as starting hands, decks, mechanics change? No. So yes, hero decks have 40 cards, villain decks have 25 cards, environment decks have 15 cards. That is still the same. Answered this already. Chaotically Random asks, just got here. For someone who has everything, will there be anything in this that was not included in the normal set? I mean, besides every deck working differently than before, at least a little bit, and in some cases a lot. Yes, there's also the event cards, which I've talked about a bit, both regular events and critical events, making a campaign style of play. There's also first appearance variants, which are hero variant cards of each of the heroes in their first appearance. All right. Joshua Kelly asks, can you give us an example of a collection? I'm confused how they work and play. Great. So you have an event card, and the event card says name of the event, date of the event. Here's some story text about what happens at this event. Here's a comic book cover from that event. Here's a bit of game text that slightly changes the way this villain plays. Play against that villain with this a little bit of extra game text. Okay, cool. You've played through the thing. When you win, you take that card and you flip it over. On the back, more story text telling you what happened in the conclusion of that event. A list of comic books that were important in that event, a cover from the finale of that event, and now over here on the side, 2 collections called collections, and it says in a game that has a collection limit, so when you're in a game with a collection limit, you can put these collections out. Many events will say you can bring 2 collections to this event. So great, you bring your 2 collection cards in with you, and they say use one of these 2 things, and then for free, not as an action, on it during anybody's turn, they can say, oh, during my turn, I'm going to use one of these 2 collections, and you've got a bit of game text that does one thing, that has some story text associated with it that tells you what's happening, and one that says another thing. And so you're like, oh, I'm going to do the one that lets me draw some cards, or I'm going to do the one that lets me do 3,000 damage. That's an example of one collection. One lets you draw some cards, other than 3,000 damage. That one we probably need to do some more playtesting on. I am lying. That's not one of the collections. But anyway, it's 2 different things that have 2 different effects, and you pick one of them. Once you've done the one collection, you take your collection card and you flip it over to indicate it's been used, and you can't use it anymore for that. So when you use one of the 2, the other one's gone for the rest of that battle, but then you still have that collection card for other future events. There you go. All right. Question. Greater Than Games says, please make sure you at Greater Than Games while asking questions so Christopher can easily see them. I agree. Good point. Questions. Did I miss? Bodrick Knoll writes, did I miss the obvious expatriate question on Revamp? No one has asked about expatriate on Revamp yet, or anything of that sort. Expatriate will get the same hard look that everybody else got. Will she change? Maybe. Maybe not. Probably. Yes. We'll see. Okay. Questions. The Tenebrous writes, is Devastating Aurora still the same card we love to hate? It's still really terrible, but it's different. But not super different, but a little different. Maybe you'll like it more now. Maybe you won't. Maybe. All right. Let's see. FDRPI. Will there be space in the Definitive Edition for expansions? Enhanced Edition had space for a couple expansions, and it made transporting the game feasible. Yes, there will be space in the box for expansions. My guess, because there's also space for the box in the box for the card sleeved. My guess is if you had all 6 of the products we're planning, the core game and the 5 expansions, if you had all 6 of those boxes, you could certainly fit all of that content into 3 boxes, I want to say. Certainly into 4, probably into 3, maybe into 2. But like, this is me guessing without that. But like, there's definitely space in the boxes. There's extra space in there. Okay. All right. Video Game Boy My Glass. Did I miss something? What are the critical events you mentioned? Right, so regular events, like I talked about, have the front side, a little bit of rules text, you beat it, you flip it over to get collections. Critical events are bigger, scarier, more dangerous events. Front side, name of the event, date of the event, a bit of story text, cover from the event, collection limit. It tells you how many collections you're allowed to bring into this event. Great. That tells you who you're fighting in what way. You flip that event card over, and there's a character card there that is a different way to play an extant deck. So I'll tell you what the first critical event is, but I'm not going to tell you anymore. There's a lot of spoilers there. A lot of new, exciting things in the critical events. The first critical event says Mad Bomber Blade on the top. It's got the date of that event. It's got some story, got a comic book cover, and you flip it over, and it's a character card for Mad Bomber Blade. Cool. That means that character card's not going to flip back and forth over the course of the game, because it, on the other side, it has an event setup stuff. But it is still a fully fledged character card that uses the Baron Blade deck to tell a different Baron Blade story. Okay. Ruby Walters, hi Ruby, writes, is the box going to be bigger or the same box as the original? It is going to be a bit bigger. We have found that there is a great love within the board game community, industry, retailers, all this stuff. Everybody loves the like 1 foot-ish by 1 foot-ish by however tall box, that big square box. That is the most commonly appreciated board game box size. Very well. Who are we to fly in the face of conformity? So we are putting it in that size and dimensions of boxes. And if you look at the announcement that I posted on the Greater Than Games website, or at the Polygon article that got posted last week, both of them have a picture of the box front, and that gives you that square sort of look. All right. Brian Dean, will there be an Oblivion expansion at the end of the Definitive series? Yes. But will it be the same or different? It'll be different. Let's see. Aerobro writes, will we see some tuning on villains to make them less swingy in difficulty? Yes. Yes, you will. There's one of the many things we looked at in the process of designing, developing, and playtesting the Definitive Edition villains. Robert Lonsbury asks, will we be getting comics like the Collector's Box and Oblivion? So no, you won't be getting comics in the boxes of Definitive Edition. Everything is still themed that way, but there's not like a proper comic book in the box. Mike Pashal asks, will there be a retailer pledge? No, there will not. If you're a retailer and you want to pick up Definitive Edition, great, contact us or buy it from your distributors. But on the Kickstarter itself, there will not be a retailer pledge level because we handle that outside of Kickstarter. Wesley, are there any actions you designed to die around? So Wesley Pfeiffer writes, were there any interactions that you specifically designed around, whether to encourage or discourage them? For instance, Mr. Fixer and his crowbars and setback with friendly fire. So rather than like taking the extant design as is and designing around it or within it or anything like that, we rather took everything and like holistically examined it. And in a lot of cases, we're like, no, this is working the way we want it to work. Great. But anything else, it's like, okay, everything's kind of up for grabs. Everything's mutable to try to make it really be telling the best version of that story for that character. So nothing is sacred. Right. Sradon asks, is there's going to be a proper solo mode? Note, there's only an improper solo mode, which involves one player playing as 3 to 5 heroes. All right. How far along are the designs for future expansions? Is it far too early to answer that? Are the deck contents of the expansions already decided? Deck contents of the expansions, not quite decided. Some of the designs for the future expansions are fairly well laid out. Some of them are mediocrely well laid out. Some of them are conceptual. It's too early to answer that, but we are already working on future content, is a fair thing to say. Broderick Knowles, seems the incapacitated mechanics were changed, or is it just terminology? Draw phase, etc. Yes, it's the mechanics themselves have changed, where now there will be, when a player, an incapacitated hero, gives another hero, instead of saying, oh, they can play one card, it's like, no, they can use their play phase. And in some cases, like, oh, great, I mean, I'm going to play multiple cards. It's just a slight buff to incapacitation mechanics. So, or a notable buff in many cases. Green Iguana asks if the definitive edition is planning to stop at the same point with Oblivion, or is it going to continue into the story further into the RPG territory? And right now we are planning these 6 boxes. We're going to do these 6 boxes. Is there more to come after that? Man, with the idea that we're putting out 1 a year starting in 2021, by the end of that, we will burn that bridge when we cross it. Currently, there are no plans to continue beyond that, but there's also no plans to definitely not. So I am not going to commit to anything at this point, except for that we're going to make Sentinel Multiverse Definitive Edition. All right. Game had been streamlined. Okay. Bayside Junior. I tried to pray. Bayside Junior asks, you mentioned the game has been streamlined. Were any of the modifiers, tracking, overhead removed? How is the game length reduced so drastically to 45 minutes? So I don't consider the game length being reduced to 45 minutes super drastic, because for me, games of original Sentinels of the Multiverse take between an hour and a half. So dropping it to 45 minutes is actually like just shaving the right things off. There's still plus ones and minus ones, but far more specific of them and far more like, this is really clear how this is being used. The tracking tokens for them are beautiful and great and really help the table presence. And a lot of the corners of like corner case and weird things and like extra bits have been reduced and like simplified and normalized across multiple decks. So as you learn how certain things work, you will see those things showing up in other places where it's like, I know how the discover mechanic works. I know how the summon mechanic works. You don't need to relearn it in a slightly different way for every deck. That said, every deck still maintains its own system of uniqueness. So in all the playtesting I did, I only had a couple of games go over an hour, and those were both because I was making changes as we played. So that's what happens in playtesting. Answered that already. Moritz Linden asks, are the first appearance variants the only hero variants in the set? I'm asking because the Prime Wardens variants would kind of make sense. Or are those obsolete anyway now? So Prime Wardens will have variants in future sets. Just like the Freedom 5 will have other variants in future sets. But the only variants in the core set are the first appearance variants. So each hero in the core set has one variant, and it's the first appearance variant. There will be other variants in the future. Future expansions will have more than one variant in them each. I will tell you that. Graham Hildebrandt says, can we get any reveals today? Say something from Tempest. So, Graham, because I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but I'm having significant technical difficulties on this side. It seems to me that you guys can hear and see me all right, although I think the video compression is bad. But I don't have an easy means of taking a card and dragging it onto screen. That said, a lot of cards have been released between the Polygon article, between some of the things that were put on Reddit because of stuff that I shared there. So, and within the next week or so, I am planning to do an update on the Greater Than Games website next week with some more content in it that will show off more cards. So I will actually just make a note right now to and it's good that you mentioned Tempest, because Tempest actually is somebody that got redesigned pretty notably, like still very recognizable as the same character Tempest, but with some very cool new stuff. Cards Sentinels. All right, so I've made a note that when I do next week's update about Sentinel stuff, I'll sneak some Tempest cards in there. Licky Zero says something greater than games. I agree. Okay. Oh no, the chat jumped again. Where are we? Where are we going? What am I missing? Oh god, there's still so many of these. Oh my goodness. How far up need I scroll? Okay, I've caught up finally. There's still so many questions. Wesley Judson writes, one difficulty with Sentinels as a board game is complexity, specifically with tokens. What changes can you talk about that are focused on helping that? So I've talked about that a little bit, but I did want to still answer this question. You're not going to have nearly as much of the need of so many different tokens. Also, you're not using tokens anymore for tracking hero HP. I know we'll have questions about that later, so I'll let that stand for now. Also, the amount of different types of tokens have been reduced. Also, the tokens have been redesigned. And then the number of instances in which tokens are needed has gotten rid of. So I didn't go back to the drawing board and get rid of the concept of modifiers that you should track with tokens, but we did reduce and focus that sort of game design angle. So, all right. Questions. Harrison Potter asks, this may be an obvious question, but if we have played and loved the original version, will this still feel like Sentinels? In my opinion, this feels more like Sentinels than Sentinels did. And that seems weird, right? But really, Sentinels has this, the ideal of Sentinels is it is a cooperative comic book card game in which 3 to 5 players play as powerful heroes, fighting against terrible villains in a dynamic environment. That's the boilerplate elevator pitch for the game. And this game, I think, delivers on that promise even better than Sentinels has. And I'm not unhappy with the way that Sentinels played for all the years that we worked on it, but this is just better, in my opinion. Right. Jared Bravewater asked, with the expansions focused on teams, what about the heroes not on teams, like Naturalist and Visionary? They will be places. Do note that in the core game, we have 2 heroes, Unity and Ra, who aren't on teams. So there are places for other characters, but that'll all kind of come out over time. I've answered that. If anybody's joining us partway through and you've asked a question and I've already answered it before you got here, good news. This is on YouTube, so when it's done, or even right now if you want, you can go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning. And I believe that the way that we've done it, the chat still pops up on the side, so you'll see the chat happening live, which quickly outpaces me and it won't be that useful. But anyway, this whole thing will still be available. So if you hear me say your name and be like, oh, I've already answered that, know that answer is in the past, but it would take so much extra time for me to answer it again and again. So, JJ Pearson asks, what is the balance / mechanic change you're most proud of? This is the what's your favorite hero question. I am terrible at having favorites / things I'm most proud of / any of that stuff. It's all I like it all, and I don't think of each of the pieces individually. I think of the whole thing very holistically. So, maybe the fact that phases now, instead of it being your play, power, draw phase, it's start, play, power, draw, end phase, and codifying those start and end phases to work like other things and making the phases work across the board in a different way. That might be one of the best ones, but it's hard to say. Broderick Knoll, can you talk up La Commodora? No, I will not do that. She's not in this set, and so we'll see her when we see her. Jesse Garrison, do all of Haka's cards have Maori names now? No, not all of them. Many, but not all. Kevin Peterson, is it possible to get more info on the lore of the heroes / storyline? Maybe as a comics line. Maybe as a comics line someday. It's the thing that we're definitely not opposed to. We've talked a lot about why we don't do it internally. But if you want a bunch of lore on Sentinel Comics, why, I've got a podcast for you. It's called The Letters Page. We record every Friday and release every Tuesday. We've been doing it since January of 2017. And it's just lots and lots of Sentinel Comics content. So check it out. Robert Lonsbury, for those who have everything, what do you do with our old decks? Play with them. Do whatever you want with them. I still have my collector's case full of everything ever for Sentinels, and it's gonna hit the table, and I'm gonna use it. That's fine. But I can't tell you what to do with your property. Hardest Band asks, will there be any expansions as part of the Kickstarter, or will that be entirely for the future? That's entirely for the future. This Kickstarter will just have 2 pledge levels, 1 funding goal, no stretch goals. We're making these in the definitive edition with it, and that's that. And by the definitive edition, I mean the core game of the definitive edition. Becky Zool asks, will it be a Sentinels Con or a smaller gathering when it's safe to do so? We've talked in the past before about doing a Sentinels Con or a greater than con. It might be something we do in the future. So I'm not going to say no, but there's currently no plans to do it. So I'd be shocked if it happened before 2023. But never say never, right? Dan Filthy Casual says, Adam's new art is amazing. That is true. It really is. You guys have only seen a sliver of the art that he's done for this so far. He's done so much art, and it's so good. I'm in love with it, and I'm excited for you all to see more of it. All right. David Richardson says, you said that gameplay has been updated to move more swiftly and smoothly. What are some of the changes you've made to achieve that? So it's less of it's not like giant sweeping chopping changes. It's more looking at every little mechanic and putting them together. We talked a little bit in the most recent podcast about the fact that we've added a bunch of not keywords, but terms. We've already had a bunch of terms in the game. Sorry, I have a mat that I stand on with my standing mat, my standing desk, and it would scoot it off to the side because I'm moving around and I'm excited. Anyway, we've already had a bunch of terms in the game, like draw. When I say draw 1 card, you know I mean take the top card of your deck and put it in your hand. When I say discard 1 card, you know that I mean take 1 card from your hand and put it in your trash pile. Great. Those words make sense. So let's add some other words like discover, which is reveal cards from the top of your deck until you find. If it says discover 1 ongoing card, you reveal cards to the top of the deck until you find 1 ongoing card, put it into play, shuffle the other revealed cards into your into your deck. That's a lot of text to put on 1 card, whereas discover 1 ongoing card is a shorter amount of text. So the first time you encounter discover, and the first couple of times you're like, wait a minute, what does discover look? So you look at the back of the rulebook and it tells you what discover means, and you're like, okay, great, now I know. But that means that the 3rd time and the 10th time that you encounter discover, the game goes faster. It goes faster in what you do, it goes faster in what you read, it goes faster in what you have to grok on a card. So hopefully that helps. Ba-ba-bum. Andy Aronson asks, how many rounds does a game last on average? This is a good question. It really varies. I've had games that last 3 to 4 rounds. I've had games that last 7, 8, 9 rounds. It's uncommon for a game to go into the double-digit number of rounds. It's not impossible, but it's pretty rare. So yeah, let's say the average is 5 to 8. Yeah. All right, let's talk about this. Greg Reynolds writes, any plans to let a site like Drive-Thru Cards have access to the cards to cut out the spectator market? No. I guess you're asking if for like something like variants. There's not going to be any cards that aren't in boxes. There's not going to be any variants that aren't in core games. We're not going to put out promos. We're not going to put out mini expansions. It's all 6 boxes, and they've got variants and events and heroes and villains and environments, and all that's in the 6 boxes. Laris in Reiki says, please pronounce my name as wrongly as you can. So now my question, what is your favorite change to Definitive Edition? Oh man, my favorite change is that environment decks are landscape instead of portrait. I don't know if that's my favorite, but I just picked one. You tempted me in with pronouncing your name wrongly. Like that's my jam. Lucky Zero says, what's the most changed hero from the base game if you're allowed to do so? It's probably either Bunker or Tempest, but I could be wrong. Yeah, probably. Bodrick Knowles says, keeping the lucky token system for setback? Who knows? That's not part of this set. It's the future thing. I do know. But we'll get there when we get there. Right now, I want to focus on core game definitive edition before we move on to the new stuff. You know, do you have an HP spinner you can show us? Well, yes, I don't. I don't have anything under the desk. I was miming. I don't have an HP spinner I can show you, but I can like mime it out for you. So it's kind of this oval thing, and it's got a couple of rivets here. So it's cardboard, 3 layers of cardboard sandwiched together with rivets here, and then there's circles here, and the circles have numbers all the way around them. And then there's a window in the middle of the cardboard on the top, and so you spin the dials to make the number whatever 2-digit number you want. And then there's a big, elaborate, cool one for villains that lets you do 3 digits. It's very fun. But yeah, so that's what the spinners look like. And there's 5 hero ones and 1 villain one. So Questions, questions, questions. Boy. Any chance you're looking? Regulus Magnus says, any chance you're looking for more playtesters? We will be looking for more playtesters over time. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point later this year we open up for a few more playtesters. But we, yeah, so yes, at some point. James Sanders asks, will Unity's first appearance be based on the animated version, or will it be her first comic appearance? That's a very good question, since she is originally from the animated show, but it will be her first comic book appearance. Good question, good question. Let's see. Jacosvim writes, can you tell us about the intent behind a given character that motivated their redesign? For example, Fnatic now having more gameplay incentives to remain at low health. So yeah, Fnatic's a great example that she wants to be at 10 or fewer HP because she is this like sacrifice, martyr, zealot, over the top character. And then when she's on her last legs, she's her scariest. And so there's a lot of cards that do that. Tempest is much more like he's doing a weather controlling thing and keeping everything, keeping a bunch of weather effects going simultaneously and having to monitor how that's going. And so you still have the like very high potential output of Tempest being able to do a ton of things, but you got to manage your resources when you're doing so. Bunker, Bunker's the big one. We wanted Bunker to feel like you're not a guy shooting lots of guns. You're a guy driving a suit, and that suit shoots lots of guns. And so you're keeping all your different processes going. And so you're like, pulling levers and pushing things. So you've got lots of guns and they shoot, but like that is happening incidentally to the engine you're building of making sure that your whole engine works properly. There's a flavor text quote on one of Bunker's cards that is, that I'm particularly proud of, because every so often I write a piece of flavor text and I'm like, yeah, that's a really good one. I like that one a bunch. And it also, I think, does a good example of explaining who Bunker is as a person and what playing as Bunker's deck is. And that quote is, yes, it's a quote that Tyler Vance said in Freedom 5, number 370, if you must know. And it's, no, it's not like driving a car. Okay, it's like driving a car blindfolded with shoes on your hands, and also you're late. So there you go. There you go. All right, where were we in the questions? Broderick Knoll says, do you drink hot tea, or how do you keep voice? I do drink hot tea. Thank you for asking. That's cold tea now. And how do I keep voice? If you've seen me at convention before, there's many times at a convention by the last day in which I do not keep voice. So, is what it is. Powerhound asks, will the Kickstarter also be used to pre-fund later expansions? No, the Kickstarter will be for the core game of Definitive Edition. Now, depending on how well it does, it might be like, okay, this Kickstarter did so well that we maybe don't do later Kickstarters. Like, we haven't decided what the future looks like, because if 2020 taught us anything, it's that deciding too far of what the future looks like we have plans, goals, hopes, dreams. But if we're like, and this is what we'll do for the next 3 years, we had plans like that. Man, are we not where we should be in that regard? But we survived 2020. We still have our employees. Like, things are working. So one step at a time, we're making this thing, we're going to do it right. We're making some other things as well as a company. We're working on some other projects. Are we planning out what our Kickstarters for 2023 are? We are not yet. So, all right. Cuddles asks, will there be a new storage box for the Ultimate Edition? The Definitive Edition does not have plans to make, we don't have plan to make a collector's case for Definitive Edition. Can you, Jokovsvim asks, can you tell us about any changes to Unity's method of playing box? I cannot. Kevin Shoemaker says, do you have any changes or ideas about Chrono Ranger Definitive Edition you can share today? None. No changes or ideas. David Robertson, is the background for Definitive Edition taking place after the events of Oblivion? No, this is starting back over again. And in fact, this is starting back over in a way that we didn't even before originally, where this is really looking at the history of Sentinel Comics to start in the 1940 and goes all the way up to Oblivion, more so than we've ever done before. Broderick Knoll asks, are all the cards in this 60s, 70s art, or is this just representative of the character's core growth / popularity cycle? This is a great question. So in fact, most of the arts that we've revealed so far have been in that Silver Age style, but there's a bunch of arts, a bunch of cards. There's cards from this 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, teens, all the way up to 2016. Nothing past 2016. Nothing before 1940. Very little in the 40s and 50s. Some, but very little. So most of the cards you've seen so far are from that Silver Age, but there's cards from the entire era, and it really depends on the character. Some characters, their arcs are weighted more early. Some are weighted more late. Like there's no art from the 60s of Arjun Adept because he's the character that started in the 70s. So that like it changes from character to character, and so the answer is like no, it's not just the 60s and 70s. It's all over the place. Brian asked, what do you think the odds are that there is a Gen Con this year to show this game off? Man, never ask me the odds. I hope that there is a Gen Con this year, an in-person physical Gen Con, but I'm also very apprehensive about there being one. I happen to be vaccinated. It's a delightful thing, I got to tell you. If you have a chance to get vaccinated, go out and get that vaccine. But I am not, man, let's just say I've got high hopes. All right. Broderick Nill says, I'm going to assume that forced deployment has the same feeling of doom, but isn't a total table flipping mess. Here's a funny story, my friend. In the deck for Grand Warlord Voss, which is where you would find a card called Forced Deployment, there is no longer a card. Well, there is. There's still a Forced Deployment. The Forced Deployment that's in Grand Warlord Voss's deck works differently than it did before. All right. Code Turtle asks, are events meant to be played with any heroes, a fixed team, or is it different depending on the event? It's meant to be played with any heroes in any environment. We toyed around with the idea of prescribing the hero sets, and then it just ultimately was like, no, especially with some later events like the Grand Warlord Voss event and the Citizen Dawn with Sunrise. Like, there's so many heroes that participated in that event that we either have to list out dozens of heroes who showed up for it, or just say play with anybody. So some of them, like the Moonfall event for Baron Blade, is the Freedom 5. Play it with any heroes you want. It's fine. And if you're worried about like, oh no, but I want to make sure it's only with heroes that are available in this era, good news. The first appearance of each hero tells you what date they're available by, and since the various events are coded by date, you can make sure you're only playing with heroes available in that era. All right. Damn Filthy Casuals asks, how many events can we expect in the core box? You can expect 12 events, 6 regular events, and 6 critical events. Alex Paul says, will there ever be official mechanisms for playing 6 to 10 heroes against 2 villains? There will not. No, there will not. I mean, never say never, but never. Chrissy Barrell asks, these events seem to go with the multiverse timeline. Any plans or ideas to include stuff from Tactics or the RPG even? Currently, we have so much multiverse timeline event stuff to get through that our intention is to get through at least all the major stuff of that before we look at anything else. Will we do other things in the future? Again, who knows? The future, a nebulous thing. Broderick Knoll says, regarding in-cap play phase, which means end of play and start of play would trigger, Lord of Mercy. So if during the if in incapacitation mode, you let another player use their play phase, you just use the play phase, not the end phase or the start phase. There's the start phase, and so it's end of play and start of play. So like anything that happens in the play phase, but like that's all. You're gonna have, once you see more cards, it'll make sense. Brian says, can we expect Greater Than Games to go back and forth between having a Definitive Edition product as its main focus and then an RPG product as its main focus for the foreseeable future? I would not say it's back and forth. From my perspective, I'm working on multiple projects simultaneously. I'm working on RPG content right now. I'm working on Definitive Edition content right now. And I'm also working on other things that aren't either of those things. Some things that are Sentinel Comics and some things that aren't Sentinel Comics. I have a lot on my plate. And I am able to multitask. And Greater Than Games as a company is far bigger than I am. We're almost 20 people full-time now. And we've got a bunch of people working in a lot of different arenas. And so we are working on, not to mention we have a bunch of freelancers doing projects and contractors. So point being, we are doing multiple things simultaneously and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. The copacetic method says, Guys is still going to be the best hero, right? If you ask him, yes. All right, I've answered that. answered that. Jokesum asks, were there any particular corner cases that you're particularly pleased with your approach to having streamlined? No, I think that we like dealt. We got rid of corner cases instead. Yeah, I don't have a specific answer to that. I think that it's more that we smoothed the corners off in a way that wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to take this and massage it until it works. No, I was going to like rebuild it from the ground up. Because a lot of the cards is like, okay, the intention of this card is this, mechanics wise and story wise. How do we build something that works much more comfortably within the system? Vrerick writes, or maybe VR Eric, but Vrerick writes, when you get around to guys, can his retcon card be in the original card game's frame? That's a really cute idea. Oh no, the chat jumped again. I've got to scroll up forever. Oh my goodness. I wish that I had a way to put a pin in the chat. It is 4 o'clock, but I'm just going to keep going. Okay, yeah, there, caught back up. Okay. Ronway writes, will there be a return of Cursed Acolyte for Definitive Edition? Ronway, yes. I'm not in the business of saying yes for future things, but one way or another, yes, Ronway. But let's see. Bodrick Knoll says, will definitive... Oh, we talked about this. I can't speak to anything with... can't speak to anything with Handelabra at this point other than to say that they're figuring it out. Alex Paul asked, will there be hero, villain, and environment difficulty ranking similar to before? If so, will they have changed in any way? Yes, and yes. There will be ranking that will be differently handled than before. Joshua Kelly says, is it safe to assume that heroes in earlier sets will wind up with more variance overall than heroes that appear in later sets? Are there any plans to try and even that disparity? So it is not safe to assume that, and there are plans to make sure there isn't that much of a disparity. For instance, Legacy in this core game only has one variant in the core game, First Appearance Legacy. Expatriate in the next expansion has more than one Expatriate variant in that set. Joshua Kelly says, how big is the villain HP spinner? Does Akash still have 200 HP? And has a huge outlier on total. Akash, but it does still have 2 HP. The HP villains, like the regular hero spinners, are like this, and then the villain ones are like this, and can account to far more than 200 HP. All right. This is a good question. Make Casey famous. Casey, you're famous now. Asks, did you find there was a deck that was difficult for you guys to adjust to the new system? Did the previous difficult decks like Argenata prove easier to make in this version? So interestingly, the more complicated the previous version, so like Argenata, Unity, and Captain Cosmic, those decks changed less. They did not zero, but they changed less than other decks did. Most of for them was like a slight reduction in complexity. Some complicated decks like Absolute Zeros changed more. Some simple decks like Tachyon changed very little. Other ones changed more. It's really a case by case basis, you know. It's not like this is the standard sort of experience we had on working with these decks. Bodrick Knoll says, is a definitive edition a definitive expression of all the work you've done with the podcast, or do you see bigger projects on the IP in the future? So, Bodrick, this is kind of like an expression of the work of the podcast. Like that's a fair way to think of it, but it's more than that. It's really a definitive edition of all of the work we've done with the Sentinel Comics IP, and having just spent the last decade living in this IP, you know, it just when we created it for the game in the first place, we were creating something for the game, and that worked out really well, and that was fun. But we just know it better. I mean, at this point, many of the listeners of the Letters Page and the people who are really cued into what we were doing with Sentinel Comics know more about Sentinel Comics than we did in August of 2010, you know? So, do we see bigger projects on the IP in the future? I'd like to. I still want that movie deal. Come on, Hollywood, call me back. Or call me in the first place, because I've never called you. Phantom Bob 42 says, "Can you explain more about the changes to the vengeance style villain team variant?" I cannot. We're not there yet. Sticking with the core game for now. Drew Wilk says, "Are there going to be challenge rules for villains, or critical events going to be mostly replacing those?" So regular events and critical events are mostly replacing those, where the regular events have game text that changes a regular villain. So that's kind of like challenge mode for that. And so you can play regular events on regular or on advanced. And so that's kind of like challenge mode. And then critical events is like variants with their own advanced text that you can choose to use or not. Remote Blackgate says, "How is our latest greatest hero guys dealing with these changes?" He is beside himself. That is not confirmation that he's cloned himself. Okay, we talked about that. Morris Linden says, "The expansions are based on teams, but there are 5 expansions and only 2 teams left. Will there be new teams? Time will tell." I would also say there's more. Well, yeah, time will tell. Jonas Stigler asks, "Do the effects in the order they interplay still apply with the new codified phases?" Yes, but slightly differently, and also it's less of an overhead than it used to be because of the way that we've done resolutions. But it is now order they interplay by play order. So villain, hero, environment, and then so if there's disagreements between those things, you do it by play order and then by order interplay, and that first half ends up taking care of most confusion we have found. So, each new expansion class new to play. Bodrignell says, "Do you feel the mechanical expansion that each new expansion included, meaning decks got more complex and there's new ways to play, was a success? And do you intend to walk that same path?" So I think it was a success in that each expansion needed to add more than just like, here's another thing. It's like, no, here's some new ideas, and there certainly will be new things added with each expansion, but less of a complexity. I'm not going to use the word bloat, but less of a complexity ramp and more of a giving you new and interesting things to do. Brian says, "For a standard expansion, how many of each kind of deck are there going to be?" I can't answer that at this point. Doc Geo says, "Any heroes not coming back?" No. Everybody who has a hero deck in original version of Sentinels and Multiverse will have a hero deck in Definitive Edition eventually. Except for Night Mist. We're just getting rid of Night Mist. I'm kidding. Brady Kennedy says, "Is there any impact to the multiverse timeline established by the letters page by the release of Sentinels Definitive, or are all the events stated still canon?" All the events are still canon. And there are new events happening all the time if you listen to the writer's room episodes we're doing. So yeah, or rather being new events being revealed all the time. Where did I put that thing? So what is the question? So, Video Game Boy Michael says, "Is there equivalent of Discover for reveal the top X cards of the deck and put all keywords into play?" Not exactly. That it's essentially I would just normalize that to like if it's to like discover 3 or whatever number you wanted item cards into play. Oh, good. Mindwander agrees with the 5 to 8 rounds that I said earlier. Thanks, Mindwander. Okay, that tells you how far I'm caught up to. Brian says, "Will the spinners come pre-made or do you put them together?" You put them together yourself, but trust me, they're easy and there's like a little diagram for it. Enjoyer of Music says, "Are all the current variants going to be included? Like, would we eventually get all 5 bunker character cards or their equivalents from the previous run?" Or their equivalents, yes. Little Sally Digby writes, "I love Absolute Zero, but it bugs me that he takes so long to set up for relatively little payoff. Is this something you've addressed in Definitive Edition?" Now, first off, I heard millions of Absolute Zero fans, that might be an exaggeration, scream in horror at relatively little payoff. Relatively little payoff? Absolute Zero? So strong! Pah! But, I will say that Absolute Zero's setup is much improved in Definitive Edition. Lars Henrique, I've answered your question I've answered it once. Please stop posting it. Copacetic Method says, is Guys still his classic periwinkle? I'm super excited for Definitive Edition, and I love Sentinels: The Multiverse. Guys is now Chartreuse. That's not true. Greg Reynolds, the way that we're going to have, like, you asked, would we let a site like Drive Through Cards have access to the current set, so if somebody wanted to pick it up, they don't have to pay lots to get it? No, like, if you want to pick up the Definitive Edition set, you're talking about current set. Like, if somebody wanted to pick up like the old stuff, they could. No, we're not intending to release any of our games for download and print and play purposes on any sites. Talked about that. Brian asks, why did you decide to keep your most infamous bit of flavor text unchanged on Ball Lightning? Because it is A, part of comic book history, part of Sentinel Comics history, and B, not said by Tempest, as you well know. So, and maybe you don't know that Tempest was a doppelganger at that point in time, but I'm not here to change Sentinel Comics history. We've established Sentinel Comics history, and we're here to make sure that Sentinels: The Multiverse represents it most correctly. Risen Chud Jr. says, Risen Chud Jr. says, sorry if this was already answered. How many variants will be in future expansions for what heroes? I'm not going to talk about that. There's going to be lots of variants for lots of heroes and lots of expansions. Big box. Bigger box. I've talked about that. Vira, I'm going to say, it says, can Night Mist Fate be retconned, please? No. All right. Andy Aronson asks, will there be an Oblivion mode / way to play? Yes, eventually in the future, if we get there. Etark Neos writes, will Dr. Kronz make an appearance in Voss's deck? I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of Dr. Kronz in Grand Warlord Voss's deck. Another question from Lars Henrique. Will the collector's box fit all the Definitive Edition Annex expansions? Probably not, with all of the new event cards and like adding a bunch of variants, because every hero is getting at least one new variant in the form of the first appearance ones. Maybe. I think the cardstock's slightly thicker as well. It's the same size cards, but like, I don't know if it's thicker. It's probably, we'll see. But yeah. I've talked about that already. Talked about that. All right. Let's see, where are we here? Okay. Guchman1969 asks, are you planning to do any supplemental books for Sentinel Comics role-playing game anytime soon? Yes, we're working on several, and so we are going to be doing those both anytime soon and anytime later. Jesse Gerritsen asks, do each of the villains in the core set have a single critical event, or do some villains get more than one and some none? No, so in the core set, the reason there's 6 regular events and 6 critical events is there's 6 regular events, 1 for each villain deck, and 6 critical events, 1 for each villain deck. However, by some metrics, certain villains get none, and a different villain gets their critical event. I've said too much. All right. I answered that. Now answered that. Bostrick Null says, is Paul involved in this release at all? Yes, Paul is the CEO of Greater Than Games and is involved in all releases of products at Greater Than Games. Much like I am the editor-in-chief of Greater Than Games and involved in at least editing all things that Greater Than Games puts out. Enjoyer of Music says, will villains have variants, or will those be represented by critical events instead? Exactly. Villain variants are becoming critical events. We found that villain variants were, by some people, beloved and played, by a lot of people not, and the inaccessibility made that part of the problem. And so rolling those into critical events. And so many of the critical events you see will be like, yes, I remember there's this like like I said, there's Mad Bomber Blade. There's also Cosmic Omnitron. Whoa, shock! But then there's other things that you've never seen before. So, talked about that. Talked about that. Okay, good. We're getting to enough content that the questions are repeating. Noj, or maybe Noi. Noj. Livik asks, other than character card variants, will there be any other way to customize or alter a character deck? Not in the core game. Talked about that already before. Sorry, I'm doing the fun thing about just reading through questions. Somebody else talk. You guys talk now. Talk about. I've been talking a lot for the last hour. You guys talk some now. So how's everybody doing today? Brian asked, will each villain have at least one event over time? Yes. Each villain will have at minimum one event. Chrissy Barrel writes, this is probably going to sound quite silly, but could you, Christopher, see 10 years from now there being a definitive edition? No, I could not. And here's why. When we started Greater Than Games, and in fact, before that, when Adam and I started making Sentinels: The Multiverse, we didn't know what we were doing. And that honestly was a strength. It was a strength in that it was, or rather it was a boon. We didn't know. There were some things that were like, oh, people, you should never do this in a game, and we did it anyway, and then we made it work, and some things we made work, and some things we didn't, and it worked out, but like, we were coming to it from a place of not really knowing what we were doing getting into it. Adam's a much better artist, I'm a better designer, we also know more about our own fields than we did then. This is really, truly intended to be definitive in so many ways. So I'm going to say never, but at the same time, like the only way that I could see myself making like a definitive edition is if we're like, oh, we're making like holographic VR card things. So we're making a completely like different thing. That is, we are all plugging into the VR sets in our brains to play definitive edition, and we'll call that, something else. But we're not. That's not on the board. I don't really see that happening. Part of this, Adam and I were just talking about this the other day about like this art that he's doing. Sure, he's going to be a better artist in 10 years than he is now, but because he's doing this art in a very specific style where he's aping the styles of the different eras, in 10 years from now, Adam's not going to be significantly better at drawing in a 60s style of art when he's doing the 60s stuff, or in an 80s style of art when he's doing the 80s, than he is now. So he's not going to get to a point where he looks back and he goes, oh, this stuff is wrong. It's like, that stuff's correct for that era. So we're future-proofing it in that way, in a variety of ways, both on the writing and design and art style. So Broderick Knoll says, do you feel like you hit the mark with the difficulty levels in the original release? And are you trying to keep that same spread of complexity? More or less. Things have gone. Some heroes have gotten more or less complex. Some villains have gotten more or less difficult, and some environments have gotten more or less perilous. So, yeah, some environments have changed quite a bit. Okay. Joshua Kelly says, with the tighter scheduling plans on Definitive Edition, have there been any thoughts on a subscription model to streamline the process of getting orders in and identifying demand? No, we're not planning on doing a subscription to you subscribe to Sentinels. Like the subscription model is once a year, buy the box that comes out. But yeah, no, we're not planning on anything like that. Michael Heatveld right? Sentinels tend to be quite heavy on bookkeeping. Did that improve in this Definitive Edition? Yes, a lot. That is one of the main purposes, one of the main goals of the game design of Definitive Edition is streamlining, reducing bookkeeping. Kevin Peterson says, alongside hero complexity, can we get team roles for each hero like DPS, healer, tank? No, that's not a thing we're interested in doing. Heroes don't quite fall into that sort of thing. When you see heroes put in that thing, like when a video game or a tabletop game takes a hero and puts them into a slot like that, that's usually in some way a little artificial. Like we want to give heroes a little bit more flexibility than that. All right. I think... Man, I'm not going to answer any favorites questions. Okay. Little Sally Digby writes, Bunker's mode cards in the current edition feel more like a handicap than a buff. Have you made them less restrictive? Not only less restrictive, but more buffing than before, and also they don't hang around forever. So Bunker's mode cards are really cool now, I think. Brian asks, did the rules for collections in the RPG inspire the rules for collections in Definitive Edition? Side inspire, sort of, but that was more like, oh, we knew we wanted to do this thing, and the reason we called them collections is because we're like, just like we did over here. But I think that even without the existence of the RPG, we still would have called them collections because it's the same sort of thing. Christopher Badell asks, any stories/intent behind the new logo? The story is we gave Daryl Lauder, our graphic design extraordinaire, kind of free reign on like, hey, bring a bunch of logos to us, and he did. He brought a bunch of logos, and there were two that spoke to us the most, and that we kind of like pulled some from both things and added a few little extra things, and that was it. But I dearly love the new logo for Sentinels and Multiverse. Sam Radicki asks, could you clarify if the only hero character card will be the first appearance card, or will it be two per hero in the core set? Two per hero, so there'll be the regular character card and then the first appearance card. So there'll be two character cards for each hero in the core set. Will Baker asks, 618-314 or 636-913? Ruby Walter says, my local game store has the villain deck, the foil version for $50, and I don't have that much money fixed income. Well, good news. If you back the Kickstarter for Definitive Edition, you'll get the game for $10 cheaper than we're going to release it for, and there's going to be a foil version of there will be a foil version of all of the character cards, hero and villain character cards, that all of the Kickstarter backers will get for free. So, there you go. Okay. Oh, am I up? Am I caught up? I think I'm caught up to modern day. I think it might have jumped and I might have missed some things, but yep, I'm caught up. Lars Henrique asks, will there be a pledge? Oh, a plaque in the Kickstarter? The pledge? Oh, a pledge level in the Kickstarter that adds your name in the game, like with the RPG and the History of Sentinel Comics. There will not. There will be 2 pledge levels. Get the game. There you go. This is a fun question that nobody's ever asked me. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. There's a question that I think stems right from that answer that I've given a few times that no one's ever asked. Joke Fazim says, this question came from Brian, but I don't think it was answered. Is there a team villain environment combo that you recommend as an introductory one for new players? Yes, the Freedom 4 or 5. If you're playing with the Freedom 5, the most experienced person at the table should play Absolute Zero. But in Definitive Edition, that's not as much of a problem. Against Baron Blade in original core game, I would say Insult Malice. In Definitive Edition, I would say Megalopolis. Or Freedom Tower. Freedom Tower is kinder, but Megalopolis is more interesting. Freedom Tower is also really interesting. Anyway, something like that. Okay. Kevin Chapman, did you expect this much turnout? I never expect anything. Like, I never expect that I'm going to, like, oh, well, I'll probably have a couple thousand backers for Definitive Edition. I don't expect that. Like, I'm very much like, I play the hand of cards that are dealt to me, as opposed to hoping for cards that may or may not exist. So, oh my God, I'm running out of questions again. They're going so fast. James Sanders says, will you do events focused on environment threats like Court of Blood? Yeah, time will tell in the future. Dylan Thurston says, the Kickstarter version includes both foil and regular cards, right? So yeah, the Kickstarter version, there's not like a different box for the Kickstarter version. There's the box that has everything in it. Also, you'll get a pack of cards to the foil version. Klutz Lament says, will the critical event cards make use of the villain card, or do they completely replace it? The critical events completely replace it. Greg Reynolds asks, what will the other pledge level be? There we go. That's the one. Good job, Greg. There's 2 pledge levels. One pledge level is get the game. There you go, $50, get the game. The other pledge level is get the game and the correct number of sleeves to sleeve every card in the game. The correct number and size and setup of every sleeve necessary for every card in the game. So, pledge $50 to get the whole game, or the amount of money that it is, we're still getting the pricing on the sleeves. I think maybe we might already have it. I don't know it, but Greater Than Games probably does. Somebody here knows it. Anyway, it'll be the amount of money for the core game plus the correct number of sleeves. Oren Bernstein says, how have other popular cooperative superhero games influenced the changes that you made to Definitive Edition? Not at all. I can say that pretty definitively because of my experience playing cooperative games. Jesse Garrison asked the same question. Very good. Brian asked. Everybody's asked the same question. Everybody's asked the question. Well, Greg got to it first, or at least he got to it first with the proper tag. So there you go. Okay. Yeah, good, great. Maurice Linden says, blind guess will be a Wraith variant of the Dark Watch expansion. Maybe. There's not an expansion called Dark Watch, though. Yeah, I know what you mean. Varya, that's not what it is. It's Vira, I'm going to say. Will there be any stretch goals? There will not be any stretch goals. Normally, stretch goals are like, okay, we'll add this to the game, and you'll get this in the game, and you get over time sort of thing. Not doing that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put out updates and be like, oh, because we're at this point chronologically in the campaign, I'm going to tell you about this. I'm going to tell you about that. I'm going to tell you about these. I'm going to show these things off. Great, but I don't want to lock any content behind. Like if we're asking for 50K on this Kickstarter, and if we make 55K, all the backers are going to get the same cool stuff than if we made $2 million. I think that we're going to be somewhere in between those 2 points, and probably not even the midpoint between those 2 points. I think we're going to be much closer to the lower number. But again, I play the cards that are dealt to me. Phantom Bob, Kickstarter have any stretch goals or exclusives? Nope. Kevin Chapin says, thank you for the AMA. We love you guys. You all kick ass. We try. We really, really try to keep up to the level of quality that I hope you've come to expect. Poker Ace 131 says, Tempest is my favorite character. Could you expand on his new weather effects? I could, yes. I could. Jonas Stackler writes, what are the different backer levels? I got that already. Phantom Bob says, how much will the game be at retail? Oh, I should jumped again. Game be at retail. It will be $59.95. Copacetic Method says, I'm doing a YouTube series breaking down the strategies for each Sentinels, the Multiverse hero, etc. If I go to Handelabra and ask them about their plans for adding the Definitive Edition, are they likely to answer? They'll probably give you the same answer I gave you. Michael Allers, will all the hero variant cards be easily distinguishable from the base hero cards? Yes, very much so. Greg Reynolds, what will the sleeves look like? Very clear. Russ Luzeski, will the sleeves be clear or have backs? They will be clear because the backs are so important. I don't like sleeves that cover the backs. I don't like it. Bryce Pruitt, thanks for all that you do. Thanks for all you do, Bryce. Etrek Neos, will Iron Legacy think to come with his enforcers? Perhaps. Remote Blackgate, how is Citizen Hammer and Anvil? Incredibly handsome. Klutz Lament, will the second pledge level include sleeves for the foil versions? That's a good question. I'll write that down. I almost certainly, right? I'm not gonna promise anything, but almost yeah, right. Lewis Schoner says, where can we get the Greater Than Games vest? In my closet. I've got 4 of them. Not going to answer that because we already talked about digital. We already talked about sleeves. Tuning down if they seem too powerful. Unlikely. Sorry, let me get that one. Brother Knox says, so you're talking about a lot of heroes being tuned up. Are there any heroes who you are planning on tuning down if they seem too powerful? No, everybody's getting kind of retuned to a level that I don't think anybody is coming down, at least in the way that you mean. If anything, somebody might argue that Absolute Zero came down because his upper limits of nigh infinite damage are not there, but also his lower limits brought up a bunch. So, Kevin Chapins, do you anticipate a cap to the backer level 2? I do not anticipate such a thing. Vulcan Gaming says, who's the character that Pale's Tempest on his alternate art defeated card, and will he be a villain in this new remaster? I would refer you to the Letters Page podcast, in which we talk about all of the characters depicted on every card in Sentinels of the Multiverse. But that is a longer story than I'm going to answer here. Sam Redicky asks, what is the process for becoming a playtester for you guys? Once in a while, we open up a call for playtesters on the website, and we'll announce it there. Sometimes we look at people who are active in the community and offer them like a, hey, are you interested in getting in on the playtesting thing? It's somewhat case by case. Colin Amos says, who's the frost-breathing guy on the new null point calibration unit art? It's the Yeti! Any longer going to be Joe Zim writes, it seems like there's a chronological range for each character. Are any longer ago debuting characters card art more weighted to older or newer style art? So yeah, so like a character that's been around since the 40s is going to have some 40s art in their deck, whereas a character that is introduced in the 80s is not going to have anything but 80s, 90s, aughts and teens. So that was the weighting will kind of rotate around how long they've been around and what years they're most active. Okay. Oh my gosh. Andy Aronson says, will my likeness be in the game? It's possible. It's possible. Joke Sim says, is your likeness in the game? Maybe not. Like, yes/no. Little Sally Digby says, do the Citizens of the Sun still have 1,000,000 X damage to each hero target static effects? Not 1,000,000, and the Citizens of the Sun have changed both in ways that make, in many ways that make them less complex, but in a couple ways that add some interesting synergies to that deck. Raze says, thank you for giving us a game and universe to become obsessed with. Hey, I am also obsessed with it, so you are welcome. All right. Brian Dean says, we'll still finally get their own bread-related card. She is not going to be in the card game. Kevin Chapman says, where's your go-to place to get something to eat in St. Louis? If I want Indian food, I go to Haveli. I love Mescarim for their Ethiopian food. Go-to place is my own kitchen. I like cooking my own food mostly, but there are some phenomenal restaurants in St. Louis. Bryce Britt says, what character do you most see yourself in? I mean, Citizen Anvil. Actually, I'm not that much like Citizen Anvil. I am somewhere between Tachyon Fanatic, so that's concerning. Alex Paul, any plans to work with other creators, even though it's solely promotional and non-canon, like the Kvothe version of Argent Adept? Probably not. No plans at this point. And yeah, there's so much Sentinel Comics stuff to do. This is the thing that we run into. Is like there's so much stuff we want to do for Sentinel Comics. Like, ugh. Lars Enrique says, when conventions are possible again, will you be at Spiel in Essen, Germany? It's one of the biggest board game conventions. We've been to Spiel many times in the past, and we will probably be at Spiel again in the future. Almost certainly. I would be the only way that we wouldn't be there again in the future is if Spiel wasn't happening. Risen Chud Jr. says, when will the Sentinel Comics PDF be available for purchase? That's a great question. It should already be. So, like, we need to flip some switches or something there. But that is a conversation that we have internally had a couple of times here. Damn Filthy Casual says, is the plan for all upcoming sets to be at or around $60? At or around there, yeah. Like we'll see. I think they might all be 60, I think. But future stuff. Video Game Boy Michael, will there be Golden Age variants of Legacy characters? Legacy? Like Absolute Zero and Captain Cosmic? Time will tell. Time will tell. Star Saber, I can't answer that question. You got to go back and listen to understand the fact that the new variants aren't something that you can just retroactively apply. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Brian asks, are the citizen teams now individual cards instead of individual citizens? Nope, they're still, each citizen is its own individual card. Ishrik Nea says, did the minion keyword get added to more cards, or did you remove it from some? Both? Both. Neither. Okay, I've answered that question. Kevin Shoemaker asks, can you confirm that Tachyon's secret identity as Meredith Stinson and her various flavor texts in the original version is based loosely off of Neil Patrick Harris's roles? Not based so much as inspired in some small ways. Tachyon's definitely her own character, but there is definitely some inspiration there in a couple ways. Make Casey Famous says, so how many vests will it cost us to get you to make a Greaser hero deck? Oh man, that would be a lot of vests. And a number of waistcoats as well. Um, Mikhail Heatveld says, happy to hear you are planning to come to Spiel again. It's where I learned of Sentinels for the first time. I think I talked for a small moment to you and played a demo with Adam. Awesome. Great. Yeah, we would definitely like to be back. Greater Than Games has been back, I think, like every other year for the past few years. Not in 2020, obviously. We'll see about 2021. This is still, like, who can say what this year is going to be like, right? I don't know if you have fear in your hearts, but I sure do. All right. Urug High says, assuming this does well on Kickstarter, we'll be seeing more decks in the future. Yes. Brian says, safe bet, but Gloomweaver would be in the Darkwatch expansion, right? No. I'll give you that. That's normally a thing I wouldn't talk about, but I'm going to say no. Okay. I'm going to answer, what is it? It's 4:33. I'll answer questions until for 2 more minutes, and then I'll wrap this up. Kevin Chapman says, will this year see another season of the Sentinels RPG? We love the collector's edition of the tabletop RPG. Ran my first session last night. That's exciting. I hope it went well. We hope to do some more live stream things in the future. We want to be all in the same place for that. So we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, we'd like to. Little Sally Digby asks, how does Omnitron's fabricate/exterminate mechanic work with its one-shots? Does Sedative Flechettes still wreck everyone's board and their face? Little Sally Digby, Omnitron doesn't have any one-shots. What are you talking about? Jacob, I find one of the more complex features in the current game to be applying new keywords to cards. For example, in Mordengrad or Imbued Vitality. Any cards in Definitive Edition that do that? Yes, a couple. But they're pretty straightforward. But there are a couple. Bryce Pruitt says, will Guise's original variant show him getting smashed by a piano? I mean, time will tell, right? Greater Than Games. Nope, that's the person who... Oh, Russ read the letter, and then I was reading Russ's message, and then he deleted it. All right. Risen Ched Jr. Roughly how many completely new heroes, villains will be in future expansions? Like, that's future stuff. Ronway says, what should I ask? Ronway, what would make you happy? Samuel Crystal says, any changes to the card stock? Yeah, the card stock is much improved. I'm not unhappy with the original card stock of original edition Sentinels. Not original, but from enhanced edition on. I'm not unhappy with that card stock. And yet, a better card stock for definitive edition? You bet. Russ asks, will the future Definitive Edition box sets go through Kickstarter also? That is a question that we internally have talked about many times, and we don't have an answer yet. It depends on how this Kickstarter does. It depends on how Definitive Edition does. It depends on what Kickstarter is like and what the landscape of tabletop gaming is like. Not only do we not have an answer, we don't have a preference. It's not like, well, we hope we don't have to use Kickstarter, or we hope we do use Kickstarter. It's very much like, we don't know what 2021 looks like. And we really don't know what 2022 looks like. So in Q1 of 2022, will we be launching a Kickstarter for the first expansion of Definitive Edition? Maybe. Maybe not. You will know when we know. We will announce it. Dob Razzle says, would you give the idea of replacing HP Sinners by an HP tracker a thought to easily track the third lowest HP target? No, you got HP Spinners. You're good to go. I don't think there's anything that asks about the third lowest HP target, so hopefully that helps. There we go. All right, last question from EQ Meyer asks, will you be able to play all the events in chronological order as the expansions release, or will you have to wait until they're all released to play them in the correct order? So you'd have to wait until they're all released to play in the correct order, but you can just play them as they come out and then jump around in time, like comics sometimes do. Also, you feel free to, like, what I'm gonna do with it is I'm gonna play them in order and as they come out, and then the next set will come out, and then I'm just gonna play them all in order again. Just gonna keep doing it over and over again. But yeah, once the final expansion's out, then you'll have the whole campaign of the entire multiverse era of comics. So yeah. I said last question, but there are a couple more questions here, so I'm gonna answer them. will Raptorbot stay small and cute or become more T-Rex? I would say still small and cute, but differently small and cute. Much more of the comic book art that it fits in the era of. I still think Raptorbot's very cute, but it's a slightly different look. I hope to see how cool Nightmas is this edition. I assure you, Nightmas will be very cool, and all of that stuff. Okay, great, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you so for joining us. We had quite a few people over the course of this live stream, and I'm always excited to talk about the stuff that we're working on. This ended up being just very rapid fire answer questions, so I hope it ended up being everything you wanted. I'm sure there's going to be a number of people going back to rewatch it over again to catch all of the things. But thanks, everyone. And like I said, I'm going to do an update at some point next week with some more definitive edition informations, and I'll put some more images in there, and we'll have a great time. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.